Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the comprehensive yet informal study of Kant's critique of pure reason. I got the intro correct this time. We did our first session in a few weeks last night. At least in terms of recording. When I upload these, don't know what the order will be in terms of like when you'll have watched this or when it'll be on YouTube, but for practical purposes, in terms of me recording right now, I have remembered the intro, and we did a lot of good catching up in context last night where we are. So I'm not going to do that all again because I usually just do that for our own purposes when we've been away from it for a while. Hopefully you're watching this in order and not taking as long as we are in between. So hopefully you can be caught up, and I'm sorry if you find some of the introduction repetitive, but still we'll just give a brief introduction just in case. So last time we went over this section right here. Oh, well, you got through a good amount of pages. The third analogy, principle of simultaneity according to the law of interaction or community. And we talked about how in experience it is necessary for empirical perception for substances metaphysically to be what was the word? Yeah, two good words for these Latin words. Here we go. To be in a relationship of commercium as opposed to communo. The difference between here, as he says here, is that one is sort of just things existing without interaction, and commercium things existing at the same time with interaction. And we went over how we were able to perceive things reciprocally, meaning like if I look at object A or substance A in Kant's language, and then just take a second to shift my field of vision over to object B, if they're existing at the same time, theoretically I should be able to look at object B first and then object A in that same chunk of the time continuum, which for Kant is, just a straightforward arrow that you can't travel backwards into. So things have to exist at the same time. How that works is that they're through causality. We are able to look at things reciprocally in that sense of the A and B and B and A that I was just talking about, because they're existing simultaneously, because they're affecting one another causally. Because for Kant, they're substances, and that comes along with like grounding. It's a bit of Spinoza's notion. However, he did also make a big deal to separate it from Spinoza in a footnote, because obviously, right, Kant's not trying to become a Spinozist. He's trying to avoid that, right, since this won't do. He wants to emphasize...
Existence is not a predicate.
Yes, existence isn't a predicate. That is one thing. It's not exactly related to this, at least that directly. In this sense, he's sort of saying we just don't, we can't assume that reality is the thing in itself. He said this way back in the introduction. I was just reviewing that again because I'm taking a class. We're reading the first critique right now in my graduate program. But we were reviewing the assumption he was making, where he's saying we can't assume that reality as we experience it is anything more than appearance, because then there wouldn't be a way to assume that things conform to us, and thus reality wouldn't really make sense. I mean, I'm paraphrasing greatly, but that's essentially, as I understand it, his argument as to why we don't have access to the thing in itself, because just reality, we wouldn't be able to like confirm that reality would work as it does. It's definitely a shaky, controversial argument. Pretty much all of the post-Kantians immediately, as far as I'm aware, post-Kantian German idealists, I should say, disagreed with that and made claims to know the thing itself. Anyway, the point is Kant doesn't think that, and thus he's definitely not a Spinozist, so he doesn't think there's an all-encompassing substance, that things are just like affections of, or modes of, or attributes of, whichever Spinozist or otherwise terminology we want to use there. Rather, he thinks appearances are bound to the intuitions of space and time, as well as the categories of the understanding. So we can't use so when he says substance, he doesn't mean substance in the Spinoza sense, or even just like in a Cartesian sense of a thing, and he's using it as an appearance, like the substance of an appearance. So so the way that works is through causality, because causality is something only known to a phenomenon, which we went over in the transcendental deduction. So that was that. And so that's how things exist at the same time, and because of the concept, he talks about that up here, a concept of the understanding of the reciprocal sequence of determinations, things simultaneously existing, or say that basically we have a concept of reciprocity, essentially, in the understanding to allow us to look at A from B and B to A in the same chunk of time, and the reason A and B can exist in the same time at all is because of causality, essentially mutual causality, or as Kant says it, commercium in this context, at least. So that's what we went over a lot last time. The main points, at least. Feel free to look at that and all the other studies if any of this is confusing you, or ask a question in the comments. So now we're summing up the 3 analogies of experience, because that was just one of them. The other one was had to do with causality, and then I believe the first one had to do with persistence. 319. Let me just look in my hard copy to see if that's right really quickly. So I should probably go to... Yeah, the second analogy was the principle of temporal sequence according to the law of causality. So cause and effect, right? He responded to Hume in that. And then the first one, right, was the principle of the persistence of substance, where he really talked about that. But again, substance as appearance, right, and not the thing in itself, which he emphasized in this one. But he does talk about just duration and alteration, state changes, things like that. So these are all analogies of experience, which we're gonna... I would summarize what that means, but it seems like Kant's going to do that here, so I think we can open up with this. Anyway, so that's my introduction. Kirk, do you have any introductory remarks?
No.
Cool. Yeah, we can get reading. Did you want to read this paragraph? Kick off the reading, Kirk?
Yeah, so these then are the analogies of experience. They are nothing other than principles of determination of the existence of appearances in time, in accordance with all 3 of its modi, that of the relation to time itself as magnitude, the magnitude of existence, i.e., duration, that of the relation in time as a series, one after another, and finally that in time as a sum of all existence simultaneous. This unity of time determination is through and through dynamical, i.e., time is not regarded as that within which experience immediately determines the position of each existence, which is impossible, since absolute time is not an object of perception by means of which appearances could be held together, rather the rule of the understanding through which all allowing the existence of appearances can acquire synthetic unity in temporal relations determines the position of each of them in time, thus a priori and validly for each and every time.
Great, thank you. So breaking this one down, Kant essentially seems to be saying that there are 3 modi of time, right? Which I just summed up earlier. The relation of time to itself is magnitude, right? Which was where we talk about substance, right? Existence and duration over time. Relation, and then relations in time as a series, one after another, which is what's related to causality. And finally, the sum of all existence, simultaneous, right? We just went over simultaneity last time, and I just summed that up in the beginning of the study. So we have substance, causality, and simultaneity. And all 3 of them, that's what it's happening, right? It's a unity of time determination. It's through and through dynamical. So it's a unity of time determination. All of these things come together, right, as one. It's a unity in experience. It's through and through dynamical. What does that mean? Time is not regarded as that which within which experience immediately determines the position of each existence, which is impossible, since absolute time is not object of perception by means of which appearances could be held together. So time itself cannot hold together. Time itself, as a pure intuition, right? We learned about time in the transcendental aesthetic of this work. Time for Kant is just a pure intuition. It has no inherent unity in our experience. It can't order anything. It can't do anything other than sort of give us the form of which something can exist. But that does not mean it can order it just because it gives it form. How does it have form? How does anything become like determinate, right? With a determinate position, the understanding has to come into play, and that's how things get unified, right? The understanding, its very function is to unify through things like the imagination. The understand Kant has three. I'm going to try to find really quickly the three like faculties that do this, because at first I thought it was just the understanding coming into the study, and then he went into it a bit more. Forgive me for taking a second. I just really want to get this right because I was forgetting it last time too, and it just seems to be an important thing to remember. Right. The imagination is one of them. I have to go back to the beginning of where he talks about the different parts of the understanding. Oh my goodness. Yes, the analysis of the faculty of the understanding. Where do you talk about? So the principles of the deduction. Aha! Here we go. I found it. Sorry, that took a while, everybody. Sense, imagination, and apperception. Thank you. Yes, these are the three original sources, which are also called capacities or faculties of the soul, he calls it, which contain the conditions of the possibility of all experience, and cannot themselves be derived from any other faculty of the mind, namely sense, imagination, and perception. So the synopsis of the manifold a priori through sense, right? So sensibility, I think, is what he's talking about there. And then we have the synthesis of the manifold through the imagination. So the imagination is the faculty that first takes in the manifold and unifies it. So again, the unity of time terminations through and he even said it earlier in this section, the imagination is what gives the individual perceptions unified to the subject. And then apperception is what we get is these are the principles essentially of apperception, if I'm understanding this section correctly. And what I mean by that is that these are the principles by which, after things have been originally unified as just one single perception for the subject, they are then put together and ordered through the I think. And these are the principles that guide how that happens. So in terms of time determination, that is magnitude, right? Substance, causality, and simultaneity. And again, all of that is happening in imagination and apperception. It's not happening in sense or sensibility. It's not happening through intuition. It's happening through the understanding and their separate faculties of imagination and apperception. So that's how that's held together. I just wanted to review that. It seemed really important and sort of essential, and it might be helpful to catch up as we get further and just hold things together. It could be helpful to unify our own understanding of what's happening right now in the critique, because it gets complicated and long and such. So, okay, so then he says, rather than the rule of the understanding through which alone the existence of appearance can acquire synthetic unity in temporal relations, right, the rule of the understanding, right, causality as well as this concept of reciprocity, they work together to give us these temporal relations and determine the position of them in time, thus a priori valid each and every time. So because the imagination and perception are doing their thing, so to speak, with the position of the existence of substances in time and perceptions in time, they're a priori valid. And this is part of the answer to Hume, right? I mean, I know it was a lot more present last time, but and just empiricists in general, right? Because they might think that things in experience, everything is totally contingent and totally, I guess contingent and purely empirical, I guess. But no, they have an a priori grounding in time and how they relate to each other and how we experience them. There's a very a priori element here. Okay, so that's that. I can read the next paragraph. Actually, Kirk, do you have any questions about that?
No.
All right, perfect. Let's continue. By nature, in the empirical sense, we understand the combination of appearances as regards their existence in accordance with necessary rules, i.e. in accordance with laws. Right, we just talked about that. Kant gave us a lot of those laws just previously, at least in terms of time determination. There are therefore certain laws, and indeed a priori, which first make nature possible. The empirical laws can only obtain and be found by means of experience, and indeed in accord with its original laws, in accordance with which experience itself first becomes possible. Our analogies, therefore, really exhibit the unity of nature in the combination of all appearances under certain exponents, which expresses nothing other than the relation of time insofar as it comprehends all existence in itself, to the unity of apperception, which can only obtain in synthesis in accordance with rules. Thus, together, they say, all appearances lie in one nature, and must lie therein, since without this a priori unity, no unity of experience, and thus no determination of the objects in it would be possible. So Kant's really now expanding the picture of why this is so important. Right? Again, it's kind of just goes back to what I was hinting at earlier. He's responding to the empiricists. He's saying, no, nature isn't just this willy-nilly thing. There are laws that just go into making it even possible in the first place. Rules, right? The ultimate rule being apperception and the principles that guide it. But the apperception really being, and then again, revolutionary breakthrough that led to German idealism really taking off as a huge historical movement and revolutionary movement in philosophy, right? How does the apperception work? What rule holds together the ultimate unity of all the rest of the unity of experience? The I think. The I think is a rule. It is the basic awareness of oneself in relation to their into themselves and in relation to objects. That's what makes all of this possible, is the I think. Hence, right, Fichte and the others coming after, and I mean, Schelling, Schopenhauer, and Hegel all sort of downplayed the primacy of the subject, but Fichte really takes off, right, with that prime principle of all experience and all unity of unity being the I think. He really takes that into the I, and I would love to actually do a Fichte study, maybe examining the details, because I didn't read too much Fichte. I haven't read any in grad school so far. I only read a little bit in undergrad. So anyway, but I'm getting a
You're more of
little.
a Hegel guy anyways.
What's that?
You're more of a Hegel guy anyways.
Yeah, I am, but I think a lot of that has to do with just me not really reading a lot of Fichte, so I don't really know how I would feel. But I mean, it seems like Fichte gets into trouble with positing the I as primacy for various reasons. It's actually one of the first essays I wrote in undergrad that made me really fall in love with philosophy, and or where I really fell in love with philosophy was writing about how Fichte doesn't work the primacy of the I, because uh, it doesn't he doesn't account for intuitions as Kant does, but it was more of a historical argument, not really a metaphysical argument. But yeah, anyway, I would really be interested in seeing the differences there between Kant here and Fichte. But just because the I think, actually, this is an interesting thing where I think Hegel specifically, and maybe even Schelling, take the difference from Fichte, because for Kant, the I think is empty. The I think is a concept that does not, right? Because remember Kant's important rule from the beginning of the transcendental logic, right? Um, every what is it? God, I'm forgetting it. It's the famous. It's like the one of the most famous lines from the Critique of Pure Reason. Every concept, without concepts, intuitions are empty. And no, without concepts, intuitions are blind, and without intuitions, concepts are empty. Something like that. So, and the I think doesn't have a corresponding intuition. It's merely pure. It's a sort of pure concept that doesn't really relate to even objects, except just it's sort of like unity itself. So really interesting stuff. You can go back to the deduction to look at that, and there's actually more of it. I found more material on that in the A edition of the Transcendental Deduction. We only covered the B deduction because that just seemed more comprehensible, to be honest. But I found out that recently that the B deduction is more of an objective thing that focuses on how objects are related to, or how concepts are attach themselves objectively, and we can have objective laws in the first place. But the A deduction puts a lot more of an emphasis on the I think and the subjective component of that. So yeah, I would love to go back when we're done with the rest of the critique and read over the A parts that we skipped originally, because those provide a lot of extra insight and just detail that we may not have picked up on. But with all that said, I think we'll move on, unless Kirk, you have any questions about this or just anything we were talking about. Although I try to keep the tangents a little limited because we've been going on this, or I've been going on this one for a while. So
No, just what do you like to read?
I just read this
I
one,
can read.
so you can read if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, we can take
Although I can
turns.
also read
Sure.
if you don't want to, but
Above the method of proof, however, which we have employed in the case of these transcendental laws of nature and about its singularity, one remark is to be made, which must be very important to a precept for every other attempt to prove intellectual and at the same time synthetic a priori propositions. If we had wanted to prove these analogies dogmatically, i.e., from concepts, namely, that everything that exists will only be encountered in that which persists, that every occurrence presupposes something in the previous state, which it follows in accordance with the rule, finally, that in a manifold that is simultaneous, the states are simultaneous in relation to each other, in accordance with the rule, stand in community, and all of it would have been entirely in vain. One cannot get from one object and its existence to the existence of another, or its way of existing through mere concepts of these things, no matter how much one analyzes them. So what is left for us? The possibility of experience or as a cognition, which in the end, all objects must be able to be given to us in their if their representation is to have an objective reality for us. And this third thing, now the essential form of which, since the synthetic unity of the apperception of all appearances, we found a priori conditions of the thoroughgoing and necessary time determination of all existence appearance, at which even empirical time determination would be impossible. And we found rules of synthetic a priori unity by means of which we could anticipate experience. In the absence of this method, and this delusion of wanting to prove dogmatically synthetic propositions that the empirical use of the understanding recommends as its principles, proof of the principle of sufficient reason is often sought, but always in vain. No one ever even thought of the other two analogies, though one always tacitly employed them, since the clue of the categories was missing, which alone can uncover and make noticeable every gap of the understanding, concepts as well as in principles.
Aha, this is really interesting. 1 second, I'm just gonna turn the light on in the room I'm in, since it's getting dark. Thank you for waiting for a sec. This is really interesting. This is an attack on rationalism. He was just right above attacking empiricism. Right, he's saying yes, these have, and you're right, guys. Experience has an a priori basis that even makes it possible in the first place. So it seems like he's being mega rationalist here, and then he turns around and attacks the rationalists. Right, he's saying we can't prove this dogmatically, i.e., from concepts, right? From analytic judgment. We can't just analyze concepts and assume, right, everything that exists will only be encountered in that which persists. We can't just analyze the concepts. Actually, he goes through the 3 analogies of experience that we just named, right? Substance, right, that which persists. Causality, in which it follows in accordance with the rule, and finally that manifold simultaneous states are in relation to each other in accordance with the rule, stand in community, right? The mutually the community defined essentially and made possible through communal causation, causality, and effect. He says we couldn't have done that in a dogmatic way, right? In a Spinozist way, or a Leibnizian way, or in a Cartesian way, or in a scholastic way, right? We couldn't have just taken these concepts for granted and analyzed them. He said, no, we had to look at the transcendental conditions, right? The synthetic a priori things to prove these things. And he says, right, when they operate dogmatically, no one even thought of the other 2 analogies. Everyone just always focused on substance. I have a feeling he's really attacking Spinoza there, right? What was Spinoza's whole thing? Substance, right? Persistence, existence. So, Kirk, what you were saying before, this is really where that comes in a lot more. But Kant says this was mistaken because the clue of the categories. You were saying before about how you can assume existence as a predicate.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's where this comes in. He's saying we can't just take that for granted. We can't just analyze that. It wouldn't give us the cognition. He says we wouldn't even be able to get to the other 2 analogies. There's actually a footnote about that. I'm interested. I'll read that, I think. The unity of the world whole, in which all appearances are connected, is obviously a mere conclusion from a tacitly assumed principle of the community of all substances that are simultaneous. For were they isolated, they would not as parts constitute a whole, and were their connection, interaction of the manifold, not already necessary on account of simultaneity, and one could not infer from the latter as a merely ideal relation to the former as a real one. Nevertheless, we have shown in its proper place that community is really the ground of possibility for empirical cognition of coexistence, and that one therefore really only infers the latter back to the former as its condition. The unity of the world whole, in which all appearances are, is obviously a mere conclusion. So he kind of just saying it was assumed before out of like logical necessity, but now he's saying we've shown in its proper place that it's the ground of possibility of an empirical cognition of coexistence. So he basically is just saying, yeah, things like this were just assumed and analyzed. They weren't transcendentally shown through the understanding uh, through the principle of sufficient reason. Even he says that's not good enough. That's too analytic. We need to really examine things through. Here we go, through the clue of the categories, right? Which is unity. Kant says that's really what experience is made up of. It's unity. So that's how you transcendental. That's the transcendental like precondition, right? Apperception, right? Unity of unity. Like it's the ultimate unity, apperception. That's how we can prove these things and understand them, through the fact that things are apperceived and fed intuition, space and time, and that's how we're able to arrive at these principles. And that's obvious. That's evident, right, in all of these. I don't call them deductions, but in all these like analogies, right? Those things, those principles have been present, and he's just trying to draw logical conclusions based on unity and the things that he talked about and the deduction that like result of that like causality, like so and all the things he talked about, substance, causality, and relationality, simultaneity, reciprocity. So we're no longer operating in rationalist dogmatism. We're using the clue of the categories and apperception and unity to determine these analogies, and we're also using the transcendental aesthetic, essentially. So we're not being dogmatic rationalists, and we're also not being dogmatic empiricists, right? We're recognizing that there are these transcendental a priori roots of experience. So it's really interesting to me now, like the more and more I read this, the claim that Kant sort of synthesized rationalism, empiricism, it seems more clear to me now when we're actually doing this comprehensive study that what Kant is just doing is like tearing both apart and just saying, you both suck. You both have failed to grasp the.
Well, I think it's more like I would conceptualize it not that he's tearing both apart. It's that he's taking the good parts or what he sees as the good parts from both and synthesizing them and getting rid of the bad parts.
I mean, maybe, but like, well, the reason I don't think so is because like he's saying both the clue of the categories, right? The unity that Kant is putting such an emphasis on, like that was not there in any tradition. And he's claiming to have found something that both haven't found. That is the clue to the transcendental deduction, and then after apperception, the things that guide apperception, like these. I mean, whether unity is actually the supreme principle or not is something hugely controversial that Kant doesn't really back up, and something that he gets attacked for. But at least in terms of we're trying to just understand historically what's happening here, yeah, I would say it's a much more sort of just saying both are wrong rather than sort of synthesizing them. I mean, you could say there's a synthesis in terms of like there's receptivity and a priori, but again, how that actually ends up coming together is something so different and comes from a principle that both traditions were lacking. So I'm more on like the side of interpreting things as like Kant is really trying to show how both of his influential traditions were totally like really missed the mark in getting at truly how experience is possible in terms of the clue of the categories, as well as sort of like assuming we just have access to the thing in itself. That seems to be another like big thing for that Kant is claiming that they messed up in as well. Both traditions, it seems. So again, not that this is like immediately evident, not that I'm like arguing we should all just be Kantians, but I think it's a really just interesting breakthrough, right? That all this is possible through the eye, I think. And what is all this? Appearance. So things to think about, and definitely interesting elucidation. And he's showing how not only did he sum it up well, I think in terms of like specific time determinations, the three analogies of experience are time determinations and how they work specifically with what he went over from the deduction and the schema and the imagination, but also that these are all things that both traditions were missing. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I don't know, Kirk, do you have any other final thoughts about this section before we move on to the postulates of empirical thinking in general?
Go ahead and
I might actually end this just to make it like nice for titling reasons and just, not going on too long, especially since last time we hit them with like an hour and a half session. So, but yeah, I mean, just looking ahead really quickly, right? We have this postulates of empirical thinking in general and an elucidation. Goes on for quite some time, and then I believe, right? Yeah, we have the refutation of idealism, which goes on for a bit. And we'll get more of the subject and the I think and the I am, which is really interesting, right? He's attacking Descartes, but it also seems to be attacking Berkeley. At least we did read a little bit of this when I was an undergrad. So yeah, this is really interesting stuff. I'm excited to get to it.
okay, so Pat probably wouldn't like this if it's attacking Barclay. Barclay.
No, yeah, Pat does not like the reputation of idealism. And he seemed to be pretty excited to get to it and attack it. So I'm really interested. Oh, actually, yeah, he does mention Barclay as well. I didn't realize that. I said last time, like, oh, he does Descartes, but apparently, but no, yeah, he does make. So he calls Descartes problematic idealism and Barclay dogmatic idealism. So it's all very interesting. I hope Pat. I might tell him that we're approaching that soon. I have been talking to him a little bit. Well, let's hope he's okay. But yeah, I'll let him know that we're getting there as well, just in case he will happen to look at that and be like, "Oh yes, I want to get on this refutation." So yeah, so that's that. Next time, the postulates of empirical thinking in general, and I'm guessing we'll do the elucidation as well. We'll have like a double session because this is literally like a few lines long. It's not even this. We just went over this now. So this footnote. So it's pretty much just this and these 3 points in the elucidation. So we'll have a double section, I guess, technically speaking, based on how Kant has divided those next time. So yeah, let's see.
We're going to do refutation of idealism next time.
No, we're doing the postulates of empirical thinking in general, and then this elucidation, which goes on for a bit. So we'll definitely cover that, and then after that will be the refutation of idealism.
Okay.
So yeah, Kantian wisdom of the day from this little elucidation summarization. Make sure your time determinations have a unity based on substance, causality, and simultaneity. And also make sure when you're in your method of metaphysics and epistemology, don't be a dogmatic empiricist or rationalist. Those are my 2 Kantian wisdoms of the day. Kirk, do you have any Kantian wisdom of the day?
None particularly.
Alrighty. So that's that, and we'll see you next time for the postulates of empirical thinking in general. Yay. See you then. Bye-bye.